with Maya Deane, one of the authors featured in Essential Dream Press's upcoming Tanith Lee inspired anthology. Maya is a college professor, visual artist, and author of the debut novel Wrath Goddess Sing. Thank you so much for joining me today, Maya.
Such a pleasure, Julia.
All right, are you ready to jump into the questions?
Now let's get started.
Okay. Is there anything you feel you have gained from Tanith Lee's work as an author yourself?
To be honest, almost like the influence of Tanith Lee is everywhere in my work. The first Tanith Lee novel I read was probably Don't Bite the Sun when I was like 11 years old. Immediately followed that with drinking Sapphire Wine, the duology. And from the beginning, I was envious. I wanted to write like that. There's just something so gloriously intense about the way that Tanith Lee presents her stories. The scenes are only the most intense moments. The way everything is described is just a visual hallucination with incredibly powerful sense experiences. And everything about and the ideas are utterly one with the plot or utterly one with the setting. There's a lot going on, but it never feels like there's a lot going on because all the elements are so perfectly fused. So that's what I strive for. That's what I try to do in my own work. Also, Tanith Lee is always responding to an enormous number of things. There's maybe a touch of ADHD in Tanith Lee's approach, but I relate to that.
That's awesome. It really does sound like you admire her and really try to channel her work into your own work. My next question is Tanith Lee drew heavily from mythology and religion for many of her stories. Your novel Wrath Goddess Sing is similarly based on mythology, but also on modern archaeology. What is your research process, and how soon do you put it away and let your imagination flow?
So I think in some ways my research process may resemble Tanith Lee's because it's all grounded in a lot of background knowledge, a lot of reading. Like if you see Tanith Lee list her influences in interviews, she always had a list of names, 30 names long, and ranging from Shakespeare to Homer to um, Proust. And it was always fascinating just seeing the breadth of influence at work. I would say that my own research process is thus it's rooted in a wide reading, but it always follows a question and answer process that leads to more questions, sort of a recursive process of interrogations. So, for instance, mythology gets stranger and stranger the more you look at it. Like, we think of mythological tales as being stable, as being timeless and permanent, but in fact, they're as shifting as fan fiction. Uh, One of the things I always talk about that kind of blew my mind as I was researching for Gotta Sing was I suddenly realized that in the Iliad, Agamemnon hasn't killed any of his daughters. We're always used to the idea that Agamemnon murdered Iphigenia at Aulis because this was this big event in Athenian drama. And yet, the more I looked at it, the more I realized, oh, right, Athenian drama was written during the classical period, hundreds of years after the Iliad, and many hundreds of years after the time the Iliad's actually set in, when the Athenians were perennially at war with the Spartans, who revered Agamemnon so much that there was actually a temple to Zeus Agamemnon in Sparta. So it's kind of not that weird that they had revisionist takes on Agamemnon that kind of built on Homer's already revisionist take on Agamemnon as being an increasingly bad leader. And, it makes for a nice Clytemnestra drama when you just say, okay, well, what if he killed his daughter? But in the Iliad, she's not dead. He offers her hand in marriage to Achilles. He's like, fight in this war. I'll give you the hand of my daughter Iphigenia. She's not even named Iphigenia in that. And that would be kind of weird if she was already dead. That's like the more we push on these stories, the more we realize how much they were endlessly written and rewritten to suit the needs of new times, which on the one hand gives you a lot of freedom to do with them what this time means. And on the other hand, also just really opens up the interpretation so broadly. How do we interpret Dionysus? Well, Dionysus in the archaic period is always presented as this bearded Silenus style god, and then later becomes increasingly feminine and androgynous. Which is the canonical Dionysus? That's the wrong question to ask. But that does give you a lot of play. And I think that's something in Tanith Lee's work that I've always really related to. She transforms the ingredients to, not to reference Chopped or anything, but she always transforms the ingredients into something, into some new alchemy that is recognizably based on the things that came before it, but also isn't. So I think when I approach the research process, I'm looking to know enough to zoom off into my own direction and to do something that both feels new and also an inevitable response, at least for me, to the broader picture. It's nice to be able to say, yes, yes, but here's the thing that everyone's missing. You're assuming it's simpler than it is. And then strange things come out of it.
Well, that's a lovely answer. I love how you said that, all of these stories are, fan fictions like of each other. I think I actually agree with that. And I
Well,
really,
the fan fiction's with an army.
yeah, um, I really like how you kind of work mythology into, through today's lens. And I think it sounds like Tanith Lee did something very similar. Um,
Hmm.
My next question is fairly similar, and I think you kind of answered it, but how do you bridge the gap between myth and history in your writing?
I think it's kind of helpful to think about the gap between history and myth from the opposite angle. History, as we know it, is a myth we tell ourselves that hopefully mostly matches the fixed facts we know. But how to interpret history is always a process of mythologizing. We're telling stories that make sense of things. Science is too. Like, what's the most consistent story about gravitation? Hopefully, we'll find out. And I think that whenever I think too much about the relationship between myth and history, I'm instantly drawn to this is going to be like a weird Tanith Lee tangent, but like The Gods Are Thirsty, her one big historical fiction book that's like this fictionalized biography of Camille Desmoulins, the author who started kicking off the French Revolution, and eventually was guillotined by Robespierre. And it's this huge book, which is basically just Tanith Lee nerding out for 800 pages about the French Revolution. And it's her own specific myth where she takes, so Camille Desmoulins' last pamphlet compared the guillotine to like stories that the Spanish had brought back about the Aztec gods. And basically, the book's called The Gods Are Thirsty, and basically presents it as the guillotine is hungry. Like the revolutionary forces that have been unleashed are going to turn on their own and devour them. And there's something mythological about this, even as we watch this character kind of mythologizing the thing that's about to kill him in an effort to bring down Robespierre. We see Tanith Lee mythologizing that moment as well, even while she's trying to be super close to history and interpret history in a really documentary way. And I think that's, as fiction writers, I think that's what we do. Like historians also interpret, but I'm sure they would object if I said that they simply do what we do.
Oh, I definitely think you're right. I think history is interpreted. We weren't there. Even if we were
Mhm.
there, our memories don't always tell the truth. I think that's a great answer. Um, finally, is there anything you can share with me about any upcoming projects that we would love to know?
Well, currently I'm working on a book about the last year of Alexander the Great, through the lens of one of his lovers, a eunuch named Bagor.
That sounds very exciting and very in line with everything you've written so far. Um, and that's it for me, but thank you again for this interview. I'm really excited to read your story for Essential Dreams Anthology. Yeah, so thank you again.
I'm really excited to write it.
That's great. Okay.